When 30 years ago David Ben-Gurion declared the State of Israel, it was appropriate that behind him should be the portrait of Theodor Herzl. For Herzl, like some Old Testament prophet in his appearance, was the founding father of Zionism. After the first Zionist Congress at Bâle in 1897, which he inspired and dominated, he wrote in his diary, "At Bâle, I founded the Jewish state. In 5 years' time, perhaps, and certainly in 50, everyone will perceive it." Just over 50 years later, Herzl's prophecy was fulfilled. For good or ill, the Jewish state came into existence. Born in Budapest in 1860, Theodor Herzl was a citizen of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was, of course, a Jew, but his Jewishness was lightly worn. He worked as a young man in the capital, Vienna, then a liberal, sophisticated and cosmopolitan place. Its Jewish citizens were fully assimilated into the life of the city. None suffered from official discrimination. Indeed, they were at the center of the rich cultural and intellectual life of Franz Joseph's glittering capital. Sigmund Freud, another visionary modern Jew, lived a few doors away from Theodor Herzl. A leading composer of the day was Gustav Mahler. He also was assimilated. Indeed, he even converted to Christianity. But the liberalism of Imperial Vienna was threatened by a new political force, nationalism. Within the empire's borders, people were beginning to identify themselves as Austrians, Hungarians, Czechs, Germans. Despite their assimilation, Jews were not seen as belonging to these new nationalist groups. Anti-Semitism was in the air. It was in the air in France, too. Here in Paris, a crude and violent explosion of nationalist anti-Semitism was to turn Herzl's outlook upside down, to destroy his faith in assimilation. It was the Dreyfus affair. In 1894, a French army captain, Alfred Dreyfus, a Jew, was arrested on a trumped-up charge of high treason and sentenced to life imprisonment. Herzl, then a correspondent for a Viennese paper, reported the trial. He was present as Dreyfus, shamed and dishonored, was led away to captivity. He saw and heard the mob shouting, "Death to the Jews." The fate of the assimilated Jew Dreyfus had an immediate and dramatic effect on the assimilated Jew Herzl. It was a warning, a premonition.
It was really a symbolic matter. It's not that while reporting the Dreyfus case, Herzl for the first time learned about anti-Semitism. He knew about anti-Semitism much before that. But the Dreyfus case was really a symbol for the fact that emancipation was not working. What was Dreyfus? Dreyfus was a French Jewish army officer who shared all the political views, the right-wing, revanchist, anti-German views of the French officer class. He was as French as any right-wing French officer could be. Here you've got a case where there is a suspicion that somebody is spying for the Germans, and one of the people who is being suspected is Dreyfus. And what does public opinion in France say? Well, of course, Dreyfus is not really French. He's Jewish. So, of course, he is the spy. So public opinion views the highly integrated, assimilated Jewish French officer. When the chips are down, they don't view him as French. They view him as an alien element, as a stranger, as a dangerous alien who is subverting the body politic of the French Republic. So this is really what struck Herzl very much. That here you've got almost the epitome of the assimilated, emancipated, well-integrated Jew, and when the chips are down, it doesn't work.
The evidence of the Dreyfus case was chillingly clear to Herzl. However gracefully Jewishness was worn, however carefully concealed, the Gentiles would dig it out and they would punish it. Anti-Semitism, he came to believe, was an inherent disease, and assimilation was not the answer. What was? Let sovereignty be granted us over a portion of the globe large enough to satisfy the rightful requirements of a nation. The rest we shall manage for ourselves. This was the solution Herzl offered in the famous essay he published in 1896, Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state. His answer was a clear and contemporary one. A flag, a nation-state for the Jews, the same as everybody else. A nation-state in some portion of the globe. Palestine was a portion of the globe that was already the home of small groups of Jewish pioneers. They had established settlements like this one at Bat Shlomo, more than 10 years before Herzl's own conversion to Jewish nationalism. The return to Zion, to this portion of the globe, had always been part of the Jewish religion. In fact, the first Jews to come to Palestine were the deeply traditional, unassimilated Jews of Eastern Europe. They came from the cities and small, poverty-stricken towns called shtetl, where the masses of Eastern European Jewry lived. In the late 19th century, 75% of the world total of 8 million Jews lived in Eastern Europe, most of them in a territory ruled by Russia and known as the Pale of Settlement. It was an area to which they were confined by edict of the Tsars. It was the heartland of world Jewry, the birthplace and powerhouse of Zionism. These Jews of Eastern Europe were united by their poverty and by the kinds of jobs they did. They were shopkeepers, peddlers, artisans. They were united by a common spoken and written language, Yiddish, and by a common ceremonial one, Hebrew. They were united by their common experience of official hostility and violence. Above all, they were united by the Jewish religion and its culture. In this unity, they already had most of the defining characteristics of nationhood. This is a traditional Jewish yeshiva or college in Israel today, where the studies are not significantly different from those in the earlier Pale of Settlement. In exile, maintaining the Jewish religion and law through traditional scholarship was all important. Religion served as a protection from oppression. It was the focal point of existence. Like these traditional Jews in Israel today, the Eastern European Jews were strongly defined in culture, dress, and appearance as Jews. They had none of those problems of identity which attacked the more assimilated Western Jews. At the heart of their religion was the hope of an eventual return to Zion. For some of them, a minority, that spiritual hope became transformed into a literal, political goal. Why did this happen?
A purely religious self-identification didn't suffice anymore, both for internal reasons, because the Jews were also going through a process of secularization and modernization. Religion didn't hold sway as much as it did before then, but also for external reasons, vis-à-vis a Gentile society which viewed itself as Russian or Polish or Hungarian or Romanian. The Jews were beginning to redefine themselves as Jews in a secular, ethnic, linguistic sense.
Pogroms, systematic and organized massacres, rape and pillage of Jews, broke out in Eastern Europe in the early 1880s. For the minority of Jews, these sickening episodes had the effect of intensifying the process of national redefinition. But the response of the majority was simpler. The pogroms didn't turn them into Zionists, but into emigrants, people on the run. They fled. They fled to the West. Most of all, they fled to America. Between 1880 and 1914, in one of the greatest migrations of human history, some 3 million Jews left Russia. Most of them landed here in New York. Here the Jews sought what they'd always sought, a place where they could live in peace and safety, a place where they could better themselves. The minority who didn't go west, the Zionist Jews of Russia, had their own theoretician and philosopher, Yehuda Pinsker. Pinsker's conclusions about anti-Semitism were precisely the same as Herzl's and were expressed years before him. According to Pinsker, those who went to America were deluding themselves. Judophobia, he had written, was a psychic disorder. Transmitted for 2,000 years, it was incurable. It followed that this incurable disease would emerge in time even here in America. Real safety could be found not here, but only in a Jewish nation-state. Jews could and must rely on themselves for their salvation. Auto-emancipation was the answer. This was the title of the pamphlet in which Pinsker developed his gloomy theories. Written in German, it was a Mahnruf, a warning cry for help to the richer, more powerful Jews of Germany and Western Europe. It was the German-speaking Jew Herzl who answered this Zionist call. 15 years later, in 1897, he organized the Great Congress at Basel, which at last brought Eastern and Western Jews together. At Basel, the new United Zionist movement was represented by over 200 delegates from 24 states and territories. Herzl was its star, its stage manager, its presiding genius. At the Congress, the large numbers of traditional Russian and Polish Jews ensured that the location of the new state was specified in one place and one place only. Zionism, said the preamble to its principal statement of policy, aims at the creation of a home for the Jewish people in Palestine, to be secured by public law. The vague term home was used to blur and soften the nature of Zionist aspirations, and it was to the goal contained in the last phrase, secured by public law, that Herzl devoted the few years that remained to him. What did it mean? Herzl knew that the population of Ottoman Palestine was largely Arab. Only by public law could a Jewish majority be created there. By a public law, he meant an international guarantee, a declaration of support and approval for the Jewish national home, either from the Sultan or some great European power. Once this had been obtained, larger-scale Jewish immigration could take place, and the Arabs would be a minority under a benign Jewish government. Herzl shared the common European assumption of his day about the disposability of less advanced countries, and about the relative unimportance of what the indigenous people felt. Herzl travelled far in pursuit of this guarantee, but his diplomatic efforts failed. The British came up with a bizarre offer. It was not Palestine, but Uganda in East Africa. After serious disagreement which nearly split the Zionist movement in two, the proposal was rejected. About this time, in 1903, there was a particularly gruesome pogrom at Kishinev in Eastern Europe. Now a new wave of immigrants began to arrive in Palestine. They were not prepared to wait for public laws or diplomatic breakthroughs. They were just going to get on with it. For a time, the Zionist enterprise was in the hands of these so-called practical Zionists. They've become known in Hebrew as the second Aliyah, the second wave of those who have made the climb, the ascent to Zion.
The first Zionists, especially those of the second Aliyah, were also socialists. And their view of Zionism was a combination of a quest for national identity and a search for a social revolution. Their analysis of the position of the Jew in the diaspora was not only determined by their view that Jews live outside their national home, but their view was also based on a socialist criticism of the role of Jews in a mainly capitalist or pre-capitalist society, where the Jew is the middleman. What you do really have is middle-class Jewish people from Eastern Europe, either sons of merchants or intellectuals or would-be academics or students, coming to the land of Israel and consciously becoming peasants and becoming working-class people because they believe that in order to really have a successful renaissance of the Jewish people, you need an overall social distribution of Jews in all ladders of society. It's not good enough just to have Jews as middlemen, be they economic or intellectual middlemen. You need a Jewish peasantry, you need a Jewish working class.
But there was another reason for this doctrine of Jewish labor, or labor Zionism. Only through their own efforts, they thought, could the Jews earn the right to the land. The right to nationhood in Palestine could not simply be given or bought. It had to be earned or worked for. In practice, its effect was to separate Jews from Arabs, to build a Jewish enclave in the Arab homeland, sometimes dispossessing the indigenous peasants. By definition, labor Zionists would not put the Arabs at the center of their concerns. Indeed, to some of them, Arab Palestine was distasteful. David Ben-Gurion from Plonsk in Eastern Europe remembers Arab Jaffa.
So Jaffa is first a ghetto, then Plonsk. Because Plonsk was a Jewish city. All the little factories were there, the shops were all Jewish, were living together. And here, there are 10 shops, Arabs, with an Nargilo, a very fat Arab, and among them a little miserable Jew. I said, no, I can't stay here. My friends both me to stay a few days in Jaffa. No, I will not. I came to Palestine, but to Jaffa. I couldn't stand it, because it was in Plonsk. The same day I decided I would walk to Petrovka. This was then the greatest colony, they called it then colonies, settlement. And we went there. In the evening we came to Petrovka. It took us 2 hours to walk. So when I came there, I thought, oh, this is the land of my dreams.
But it wasn't all dreams. Life was very hard. Mutual self-help, teamwork, the communal spirit were essential for survival. These were the founders of the first kibbutz, or collective farm, at Degania in 1910. It still flourishes today. One of the original members of Degania, Miriam Singer, remembers.
בין יתר הדברים היה הדחף לבוא חזרה למולדת, ואחרי כן החזרה לטבע. העם ישראל היה רחוק מהטבע, ואנחנו רצינו להתקשר לטבע. וגם הרצון לשחות נגד הזרם, לא להיות שגרתי, לא להיות החיים המקובלים של עיירה קטנה או עיר, לעשות דבר חדש. היו חיים קשים, אבל דבר אחד היה, שמחת חיים, אנחנו רקדנו הרבה מאוד, אנחנו קיבלנו את זה כמו מובן מאליו, שככה צריך לחיות, ואחרת אי אפשר, ואפילו בהלבשה. היה מעיל אחד בשביל בחורות בדגניה, בשביל נשים. מעיל חורף. כשמישהי נסעה, אז היא הייתה צריכה לחכות עד שהמעיל הזה חזר מהנסיעה. אם היא הייתה קטנה או שמנה או רזה, זה לא חשוב. המעיל הזה האחד שירת את כולם.
By 1914, amongst perhaps 500,000 Arabs, there were over 80,000 Jews in Palestine. They were there on sufferance, not of right. Most of them then, as now, lived in towns. The small Jewish community rapidly developed its own industry and its own institutions. Education thrived, and the infant nation had accepted a new revived Hebrew as the national language. Many of the characteristics of the future state of Israel were established before 1914. The modern kibbutz movement, still the ideological mainspring of Zionist energy, derives from the communal doctrines of the early labor Zionists. Those socialist founding fathers are buried here near Degania. The graves are a monument to the idealists who inspired and influenced the future state. They lie on the banks of the biblical Sea of Galilee. But there are monuments to the harsher reality of the origins of the state. Alexander Zeit was a leader of the Hashomer, the Watchmen, the movement of armed auxiliary soldiers who took it upon themselves to defend the scattered Jewish settlements against, amongst other things, the anger of dispossessed peasants. Affecting a romanticized version of Arab dress, in a kind of denial of their European origins, they were the forerunners of Israel's modern army. The Hashomer showed that from the beginning, violence and force were the inevitable consequence of establishing a Jewish political presence in the Arab Middle East.